Welcome everyone to our Data and Computational Science Series workshop entitled Creating a Resume in RStudio using R ORCID and the ORCID API. We are very fortunate today to be joined by Peace Ossom-Williamson. Peace is the Director of Research and Data Services and a Health Sciences Liaison at the University of Texas at Arlington. She also teaches public health informatics at UTA. She has experiences with technical and public services and research and scholarly communications support, including data management planning, finding open educational resources, and choosing where to publish and answering copyright questions. Peace is passionate about public health and data services, and I'm so happy that Peace was willing to do this workshop and participate with us. I will say this workshop started as me seeing something on Twitter and Peace responding to that same Twitter post, and was willing to develop this very specific workshop for this series today. So I hope you really all enjoy the workshop and the bringing of all these different tools together. That said, there's a lot of moving parts in this workshop. Peace has been able to bring together, ORCID and R and a few other technical components. And so we do have something that we're going to try today for the workshop. If you notice, there's a main meeting and a breakout session. If you are struggling, please put in the chat either to everyone or directly to Mark Chalmers, who's going to be our floater today along with Jenny Latessa, that you are struggling, and you and Mark can then go into the breakout session, and Mark will work with you to resolve issues as best we can, provided that this, we know this is a remote virtual environment, and given it's a technical workshop, that can be a challenge. But you can go into it and then rejoin the workshop. So we're going to give that a try. Hopefully it works. But please communicate through the chat if you're having any issues. So Peace, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn things over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Peace Ossom-Williamson. I'm placing in the chat a link to the workshop materials. This was sent out to everyone via email yesterday, but I wanted to send it just in case so that you have the link on hand. Everything is provided there. I'll first start with a presentation, and those slides are also provided there, as well as all the workshop materials. Before I begin, I wanted to quickly just gauge the room and see what is your background and experience with R? And can you just provide in the chat your experience with R, whether it's, just beginning, you've attended a few workshops, you use it for work or your research, or whatever your use of it may be. All right, I'm starting to see responses come in, everything from 0 to I use it for research, helping people during workshops using it, attended a semester course on R or teaching a course in R. So we have a really wide variety of experience. Now, I will state that this workshop is for our users. So I apologize for those with a little bit less experience in how little detail we're going to be providing about R. The focus of this will be more on the whole ORCID API and, using that within our Markdown to create this document as a resume that's really easily updatable. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my camera off so that I can, sip my coffee here and there. But I will share my screen and we'll go ahead and get started. Once again, as mentioned, we do have helpers. There's Mark and Jenny who are here and available. Please make use of those helpers and make use of that breakout session if you are having any technical problems. Now I'm going to make effort to talk through everything that is required for setup and replicate that in my walkthrough as well. So hopefully you're able to follow along regardless of where you are. But of course, it's really great to make use of that. That way you can keep up with the workshop, particularly if you fall behind. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about using ORCID and R Markdown to create an easy to update resume. As Amy mentioned, this is part of the Data and Computational Science series, and I am so grateful for the invitation to come and provide this workshop. Now, the objectives of this workshop are to describe the purpose of research IDs, to develop a researcher profile in ORCID, and to utilize ORCID API via the R ORCID package in R in order to create a resume, also using the VITAE package and R using R Markdown. So if you are not yet familiar, a researcher ID is what we are going to be using today with ORCID. ORCID is the main platform of the workshop. If you do not have an ORCID profile, I definitely recommend you visiting the ORCID website and signing up and creating your profile. If you were able to create one yesterday or you already had one, you can obviously make use of that, but you'll need to have an ORCID profile for this workshop. So I'm reminding you of that now so you have time to create your profile or update it. If it needs some updates, just take a look at it and make sure that it's up to date so that by the time we are completed with the slides, you have an up-to-date ORCID profile. All right, now back to the presentation. So what are researcher IDs? These assist with compiling your work metadata or descriptions of your work and allow for name and organization disambiguation. And what that means is if your name is John Smith and there are tons of other John Smiths within your discipline, it helps distinguish which author is tied to which publication, grant, and other items. So that is what I mean by disambiguation. I'm from Oklahoma. We have our own OSU, Oklahoma State. There are other OSUs, right? Ohio State. So being able to distinguish between similar names, if your name changes at any point, or anything like that can confuse what to attribute to which author, organization, and so on. That is the power of the researcher ID and the main focus of it. Another benefit I see as coming with the researcher ID is that these are often integrated with other platforms and services. So if you've published, you've probably come across journals that require you to provide your ORCID ID. You may have come across funders as well who've required that. And that just, once again, synchronizes systems. It allows publishers, funders, and others to provide accurate information about your name, your organization, and so on. And it also allows for information to be shared the other way so that your ORCID profile is kind of being updated automatically without you having to do anything, just by entering your ORCID ID as you're submitting like a research paper. Obviously today we're focused on ORCID. However, there are some other commonly used platforms. You may have heard of Publons that also exist through Web of Science, and then Scopus ID. Once again, the focus of this workshop is on ORCID. So this is just a screenshot of my ORCID profile. If you aren't familiar with ORCID, you can see that the link is provided below, and you can provide your ORCID number either as the full link or as just the number. And if you think about it, it's very similar to kind of the DOI for an article. This is like your DOI for a person. So now you can easily find a researcher using this ORCID ID or using this ORCID profile, and this exact link will link you to the profile that there's a screenshot of right in front of you. So today we're going to use a little bit of the fun part, at least fun to me, I guess, because I'm in data, of ORCID, which is working with the ORCID API. The API is RESTful and URI based. The technologies include REST interactions via HTTP calls, OAuth and XML or JSON data exchange formats. You can use your web browser, a plain text editor, software that's capable of making HTTP requests, which include Google Playground, Hurl.it, Java, Ruby, Python, PHP, and of course R, which is what we'll be using today. There are different types of access. I saw in the chat that UC is an institutional member, so there are levels to access. I think it may have to do with institutional affiliation. However, for the public, there's no token or registration needed. So you'll see that as we go through, you're not going to have to register for the API. You'll go ahead and be able to use it just from having a profile. However, you can only access data that are marked as public. So a researcher can determine what level that their data are provided at. So you can see that in the bottom left of the screen that there's a public option, a limited option, and a private option, either for their publications, affiliations, or whatever information they may add to their profile. So if you have access to the public API, you're only accessing those items that are marked public. Also, you can only read data. You cannot do anything other than access that data. For member institutions, obviously this is more for the institutional employer access. This requires registration and an access token. However, these folks can access data marked as public or limited, so it's kind of one more level down. And they can read, edit, append, and also create within the ORCID API. You can see benefits of this for uniformity, assisting researchers with setting up their API and them not having to do it themselves, but their institution doing it for them, and keeping it up to date. Of course, specific permissions must be granted by the scholar in order for these actions to take place. Fields within the ORCID API, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but just in general, these include things like name, work title, education, and more. So I have links to information about ORCID API. You don't necessarily need to record these down because these are part of the workshop instructions, and I'll share these again as live links that you can access. However, I wanted to provide it as part of the slides as well, just so that I could describe what they are. So that first link is basically the data fields that exist within the ORCID API. It's kind of a long lead link, and then it's actually buried in there under a section called "What sections can I read on ORCID record using the API?" And you click on it and it opens up a table, and then you're able to see the table. One thing that I found very useful is my colleague, Clark Iakovakis. He created this walkthrough of using R ORCID, which is the platform for interacting with ORCID API through R. And this provides more detailed steps for using R ORCID. So if you had responded earlier in the workshop that you're still a little bit new with R and you're not as familiar with it, this is really helpful for you to understand kind of the syntax of a lot of what we'll be doing. If you want to be able to look through that later, maybe you kind of follow the steps now, but you look through later and you want to learn a little bit more. It's a little bit outdated, so Clark sent me a file, which is I've uploaded into our folder that we're going to download in a minute. And that file is called R ORCID Employments Generic Version 3. It is an R file, so you'll be able to open it directly in RStudio and access kind of instructions for how to do certain things with R ORCID. So with those resources, hopefully that's helpful enough for after this workshop, if you want to learn how to do more things or you want to make small changes to the template, this is documentation that can help you do that. All right, now switching from kind of talking about ORCID, let's talk a little bit about R Markdown. Many of you seem pretty familiar with it, so I'm not going to go into too much detail so that we can get to the workshop. But if you aren't familiar with it, our Markdown documents are those that combine kind of comments, code, and descriptive text to be like a very simplistic and easy to understand document. Markdown documents exist in various formats. You'll notice once we get to the workshop that we have basically different kinds of Markdown files. So I have all of our workshop files in GitHub. And if you look in GitHub, I'm using GitHub flavored Markdown. So it's a little bit different than our Markdown in a little bit of some of the syntax and things like that. However, for our Markdown and GitHub flavored Markdown or any other type of Markdown, this is that idea of being able to, rather than having to use a Word document, then you're able to, use a document type that allows you to kind of combine a lot of different elements in a very clean and easy way. Another benefit of our Markdown is it allows you to spot mistakes. So one thing you'll see as we get through the workshop is you're able to run small bits of code throughout your R Markdown before you knit the final file. So then you're able to see that those code blocks are working and they're able to function correctly and output what you need. And then, of course, the final goal is to have everything be pretty. In this case, we're going to have our final resume file as a PDF. And here's the anatomy of our Markdown document. Once again, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but you can see here at the top, this is where you provide what we in libraries call the metadata. So the information about your document will go there, and you'll see that in our Markdown file, our R Markdown file. You'll also see there's a code block, which is basically the details about the R Markdown file to specify certain things when you are able to go ahead and knit. That information is then followed by kind of the actual body of your R Markdown file, which can include text. So this is a description of text, and it can include, I don't have a picture of it, and it can include code blocks. So these are the global options for the R Markdown file, but you would have a very similar code block for R code that's embedded within your file. So that is pretty much the anatomy of an R Markdown file. This next slide goes in a little more detail, but since most of you are pretty familiar with R, I'm not going to get into too much about what all of this means, and mainly because we're not going to be changing anything with that. In RStudio, when we're using R Markdown files, you'll be able to use the knit button to create documents. So we'll create the resume PDF using knit. You'll want to make sure that before you start anything, you have an updated RStudio and Tiny Text as provided in the email that I sent ahead of time. We'll talk through this as well. But those are required in order to be able to knit at the end. So it's kind of something you have to do really early that will determine success at the end. There is the option, if you aren't using RStudio, maybe you just use R, just old school, like straight up, then you can use the command that's provided here to be able to knit. I've also provided, it's here in the slides, but also it'll be in the workshop instructions, a link to the RStudio's R Markdown cheat sheet, which provides a cheat sheet of how to use R Markdown. So if you want a header one, you put a £sign and then a space and then your content. If you wanted a second level header, you'll put £signs and then a space. One thing to remember is always to use those spaces after the item that will allow you to create that text type, whether that's a header, a bulleted list, and so a numbered list, and so on. But once again, this is all provided within the instructions that we'll be using along with R. So you'll have that file open and you'll have your RStudio open, and so you can always access all of these links there. That's the end of my presentation. So we're going to go ahead and get into the workshop. I believe the link to the workshop has been provided twice, so you should have already access to this page in OSF. I also recommend just going ahead and opening the GitHub repo in a new tab so that you can scroll down and see the workshop instructions. So we're going to follow these instructions stepwise. If you lose your spot, please feel free to just look over at the instructions and see what step you may have missed so that you can, keep up. You can also, of course, ask questions as we go. Any questions at this point?
I'm having trouble getting that website that you have. It won't work.
Which site are you trying to access?
The GitHub one that's listed at the top. It says GitHub POW123.
Let me provide it here in the chat.
Okay.
Try that and see if that works.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so once again, this is all of our instructions. We are going to make use of just this page as well as obviously RStudio. So this is where everything is going to come from. So in order to make use of these workshop files, you're going to go to, and it may look slightly different depending on what browser you're using, but you're going to want to download the zip file that contains all of the workshop materials for today's workshop. And once you download that zip file, you're going to want to, I'm going to put mine on my desktop. One second. So here's my desktop. I've just opened it in File Explorer. And here is the zip file that I just downloaded. So I've opened this zip file. I'm going to just take this folder and copy it into my desktop so that I unzip it. Of course, if you're really familiar with zip files, you can unzip it however you like. That's just how I do it. Just make sure that the folder is unzipped so that you're able to work with and access the files that are within it. I am saving it on my desktop. I recommend saving it on your desktop as well, just so that we're all in the same place. But then you can access that there and know that you have downloaded and unzipped all files. So I'm going to go ahead and give like a couple minutes just for you to be able to do this process. So once again, you're going to download this zip file and unzip it, save the folder to your desktop, and please feel free to speak out if you have questions or post them in the chat. All right, at this point, you should have downloaded this folder. So downloaded the zip file and then unzipped it and save the folder to your desktop. If you are not there, please let me know so that I can slow down. But I will keep talking so that you have a little bit more time to be able to make use of this. Now, while I am here, I wanted to show you what files exist within this. Some of these are just files for working with R ORCID, but some of these other files are important to know. So I have a file, I have a couple example profile pics. So this resume file, sorry, just make sure I'm not muted. This resume file allows for you to have a profile pic. Now, I recommend you, if you would like to add your own picture, just save a JPEG document to a JPEG file to this folder and rename it profile pic with all one word, profile capital P, pic capital P, and then you're able to use it. Now, of course, you don't have to do that now. You can make use of the just blank blue body form that I've provided here, but that is just a profile picture option that you can do by saving a picture into this folder. I've also provided an example CV to see what the final product looks like. Obviously, I left default information in here, but you can see kind of the overall look of what it looks like once you are able to knit and create that final PDF document. And of course, our goal at the end of this workshop is for it to reflect your information. The other item that's in here is the Readme file. I don't recommend using it outside of GitHub, so I recommend just, you can see it here, or you can click the Readme and it'll open it here. Because, like I said, it is using GitHub flavored Markdown, so I don't recommend using it outside of just looking at it on the GitHub page, the link that I've provided you, because a lot of the links won't be working and things like that because I'm using GitHub flavored Markdown. You can see the license and other things, which this workshop is, everything I do is Creative Commons CC BY 4.0 license. So all of that information is there. So you have full permission to reuse, change, do whatever you want with this workshop. All right, so that's just a little bit about what exists within this folder. And of course, the most important thing that I forgot is the actual R Markdown file, which we will be using as our template and our walkthrough for going through this workshop. So if you have one screen, I recommend kind of splitting your screen between this page, this link that was provided in the chat, and RStudio. If you have two screens, lucky you, then you can also have, one window with RStudio and one window with the instructions. So I'm going to go ahead and open RStudio. And that way we can get started. If there's anyone who's having any problems with downloading the folder, finding any of the files, understanding what the files are, or anything related to that, please feel free to ask within the breakout group or ask within the chat if it's a quick question, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to move my instructions off screen, but of course you have access to the instructions yourself through that link. All right, so I tried my best to make R as similar to somebody just starting out as possible. You'll want to go ahead and open. Actually, I'm sorry. Let me follow my own instructions. Okay, so you'll want to go ahead and make sure you're using R that's updated, so it needs to be at least version 4.0 and greater. So you can check that here and make sure that your R is updated. RStudio, you can check for, let's see if I remember this. Check for updates. Under help and see if there are any updates, and it will let you know whether you're using the newest version of RStudio. And for tiny text, I recommend walking through the instructions that are provided in the debugging, which I'm providing now in the chat. This is going to be very specific to your machine, so I definitely recommend any questions that are related to installing or updating tiny text to be asked in the breakout group so that the specific specifications of the error messages you're receiving or whatever issue you might be running into, you can address that now. So I highly, highly recommend working through and making sure you have updated RStudio and Tiny Text in order for this workshop to work. Now, obviously, if you don't, you'll still be able to work through the R Markdown file. You just won't be able to create the PDF at the end. And even if you wait to the end to update these things, it kind of requires you to start over. So that's why I'm really, really emphasizing that those things are completed before we get started.
Hey,
So
Peace,
oh yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make sure. So does everyone know how to get into the breakout session? So like Michael, I see you're having some issues, and Mark is willing to work with you if you want to go into the breakout room. If you click at the bottom, you'll see breakout sessions. If you click that, it'll come up. You'll be able to see a window that says Tech Help, and on the right-hand side it says Join. Please message Mark if you're going in, because Mark is actually staying in the main room unless somebody needs help. But if you're going to go into the breakout session, contact Mark Chalmers. So I'll just put, he has message, but I'll make sure you have his name in the chat, and let him know that you want to go into the breakout room, and then go ahead and do that. So Michael, have we provided you enough information to get into the breakout room or to solve the problem that you're dealing with?
So now we're in RStudio. If you're following along with the instructions, just gonna drag it over. This is where we are. We're in the Get Started section. So you've already downloaded the repository or folder from GitHub. You've unzipped the folder. I recommend renaming it from this long thing to a shorter thing, but it really doesn't matter as long as you know where you are. And then uploading your profile picture into the folder with this file name. So we already talked through that, and now we're going into step 4. So if you're following along with the instructions, we're in step 4, and I did make sure the numbering continues through the different sections so that when I say 4, it's only in one place in the document, and step 9 is only in one place in the document, and so on. All right, so now we've opened RStudio. We're going to create a new project. This may look a little bit different depending on your setup, your computer, your operating system, but you're going to want to go ahead and start a new project. There's an option for that here as well for me. It really doesn't matter as long as you're able to go ahead and start a new project. Once you start a new project, you're going to select existing directory. So in this case, we have an existing folder that already exists, which is the one we downloaded. So we're going to point to that so that we can work within that directory. So now we're going to navigate to the folder or directory that we're going to make use of, and we're going to select that as our location for creating our project. So now you'll notice in the top right, it tells you your project, typically named after the directory that it's in. You can see the folder that I'm located in here at the top. You can also type in, see, this is where I get in R. I always forget, okay. Sorry. For R, you type in get WD and open and close your brackets so that you can see that you are currently in the R ORCID resume workshop folder. So you want to make sure of that so that everything that you're doing is working within that. So as you're setting settings to connect to ORCID and everything like that, you're making sure it's all being done here in this folder. So go ahead and set up your project. So once again, you'll go up here, you'll choose new project. you'll choose an existing directory and you'll navigate to that R ORCID folder that you downloaded to your desktop. As a double check, I definitely recommend making sure you type in get WD so that you can see that you are in the actual right location, and then you'll know that your project space is set up and your directory are both set up and you're in the right place. I'm taking a little bit more time for these things because it can get really confusing down the line if a step is missed here. So that is why I'm going a little bit slow with this, but it will speed up, I promise. So once you are in your R ORCID resume workshop directory, you'll want to open that R Markdown file. So the great thing about RStudio is it shows you the files that are open or the files that are available within this directory. So you can see that our R Markdown file that is here. You can also open the file and find the file here as well. And that file will basically push your console down, so it'll make it a little bit smaller, but you can see everything that I've done here can be viewed, but you can also see our R Markdown file for our resume. Now, if you recall with R Markdown, it provides this metadata first. So first we're going to provide the metadata. We have it set up to work within the VITAE package within R, and we'll talk through that more and more. But once you're able to open the R Markdown file, I want you to load 2 packages. Now, if you've never installed these packages before, you'll want to use install. And you're going to just do this in your console. Install.packages. The first one you're going to do is R ORCID. Now, I have already installed R ORCID, so I'm going to cancel. But if you have not installed this yet, it should commence a process of installing R ORCID on your machine. If you have not installed HTTP-UV, you'll also install packages, and you'll want to make sure you use those quotation marks to install those packages. So as you can see, I've installed both packages and made sure that they are now provided in my RStudio so that I can load them. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load these packages, and you don't need quotation marks because now they're a little bit more recognizable because you've installed them already. And you'll do that by using library and the command, the command library, and then within the parentheses, you'll put the name of the package that you want to load. And you'll know that they successfully loaded because you don't get any sort of error. If you did get an error, it's likely that you need to go back and install packages and install that package. So you'll want to load both of those libraries in order to begin connecting with ORCID. Now, hopefully at this point, you've had time during the presentation to create your ORCID profile. If not, of course, or update your profile. If not, of course, you can take the time to do that. We're going to keep going, but if you ever need to see your ORCID profile, obviously you can just go to the internet and look at it. Oh, and let me say a reminder, ORCID does not have an H. And I do this all the time. I try to add an H like the plant, but there is no H. So just remember that as you're putting in commands or anything related to ORCID, that you are spelling it correctly. So to see your ORCID profile, you're going to use this command. Don't enter it yet, just type it in, because you're going to replace the words your ORCID with your actual ORCID ID. Now, my ORCID is saved within this document throughout, which you'll want to replace eventually. But just to be able to see your ORCID profile, you'll want to use as ORCID command with your ORCID ID as the input, And then that will become the input for browse, which means that it's, inside of the browse is parentheses. And you can always input that. Oops, I clicked it in another window, and Google Chrome, which is my default browser, opened my ORCID profile. I can try doing it again with Google Chrome here. I'm just going to hit up to load it again, and you can see that I can view my ORCID. It may require you to authenticate first. If that's the case, let's go ahead and authenticate, and that way this command will work for you. So at this point, you should have the folder downloaded and unzipped. You should have your project ready and set up in RStudio, and you should have opened the R Markdown file and loaded the two libraries, R ORCID and HTTP UV. So next, what we're going to do, okay, yes, thank you, Amy. What we're going to do is authenticate with ORCID. So once again, if you're following along the instructions, we're on to authenticating with ORCID. So first, you'll want to make sure you're logged into ORCID. So I'm going to reopen this tab. I'm going to go ahead and log in. So you're going to go ahead and log into your account with ORCID, and you'll sign in so that you are now recognized as being logged into your ORCID profile. Once you are logged into your ORCID profile, you are going to use ORCID_auth, AUTH, and this is going to open, I'll load my browser here so you can see it. I'm already authenticated, I forgot. So it's going to open a new window, which will open, a text editor, which will be called, it will open a new window in your browser that will provide you with a statement that basically tells you that authentication was successful and that you can close out and go back to R. In my case, mine looked a little bit different because I had obviously gone through this workshop on my computer, and so it already recognized that I have an authentication ID. But if you get that browser window open that tells you the authentication was successful, then you're good to close it and go back to your RStudio, and you should see the word bearer followed by an alphanumeric code, which you'll want to copy and save for later because we're going to use this within our Markdown file. So now within the console, you're going to load the use this package. So once again, we're going to type in library use this. Once again, if you don't have it installed, you're going to do install packages. Oops. To first install it, and then library command to load it. Now, the next thing, the reason that we're going to use this package is we're going to edit our R environment to make sure that it authenticates with our ORCID. So we're going to use the following. Oops. We're going to use the following command to edit our project. So if you guys remember, we created a new project within the folder that we downloaded. So we want to edit the R environment for that project. If I were to change project to user, that would mean that it makes a global change to me as a user of RStudio and would work across files and projects. But in this case, we're just focused on doing this within the R ORCID workshop project. So we're going to use that command, and you'll see a new file open within the top left of your RStudio. So within that top left, this text editor is basically your R environment. So you're going to have a very specific but very simple instructions that you'll want to provide. If you can't spell like me, just be careful with your spelling. And you're going to want to input that alphanumeric code that you received earlier. So I'm going to scroll up. If you recall, when we use that ORCID_auth command, we received this alphanumeric number after bearer. So I copied that number and then I typed in ORCID_token in all caps equals, and then I provided that alphanumeric code in quotation marks. Now, once you type that, you're going to hit enter so that you have a blank cell underneath it. And that is going to be all you're going to do within this file. So once again, you're basically setting up your token to be tied to this project so that you're authenticated with ORCID every time. And I'm just going to save this. I just hit Control S. If you're on a Mac, Command S to save this and close it out. And once you're able to do that, you're going to restart your R session. I'm going to take a second to make sure that we're moving along and see if anyone has any questions. Or just some time for you to get caught up if you missed a step or anything. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and continue. Hopefully that's given folks enough time to catch up. I've seen a few messages in the chat that folks have caught up. Of course, if you are not caught up, feel free to ping me and let me know. Or if you need me to slow down, feel free to let me know that as well. But we're going to go ahead and continue. And the reason I paused there is because the next step is that we'll restart your R session. And so I wanted to be able to have the steps we just took available here so that you could see anything that I just did as you got caught up. So the next thing we're going to do is restart your R session. There's a little footnote that goes into detail about how to do so. I'm going to just show the most common way, which is to go to session and then select restart R. So you can see that option here under session. So we'll go to session, restart R, and you'll see down at the bottom that it's now restarting your session. And the session now should exist within those new settings that you just set up for this project. Once you get the little arrow, that means that it's rearing and ready to go for your next command. And then we can move on to actually updating the resume template. And that will be the final part of this workshop. So once you are here, it's all just playing around within the template. And hopefully this is the fun part. Once you're set up, Amy mentioned at the beginning, it's kind of a lot of things into one. And so I really wanted to make sure all of the setup was done accurately so that this part is a lot less tedious or troublesome. Also, there's so many options within the VITAE package. We're using their CV called Awesome CV, but there are multiple types of CVs that are available. I'm going to open so you can see. So here's the VITAE package. It's located within GitHub, so you can read more about it. But on this page, it has pictures of the various templates. So we are using the Marie Curie Awesome CV. There's also Heinemann, LaTeX, Markdown, 20 seconds, modern, and so on, that are just already created templates for a resume that you may be able to make use of. We're going to stick with Awesome CV just for this workshop, but of course, you know, if you would like a different style, you can obviously, after the workshop, make use of a different resume style. And so that is always pretty cool, I think. You'll notice there's just a few steps to updating the resume if you are looking within the instructions. So hopefully you find this to be rather easy to do. It's obviously even easier every time you need to update it. You'll just rerun and knit everything, and it just outputs with any added publications or any changes based on the ORCID data that you imported. All right, so now let's update the resume template. Once again, we're using the VITAE package in the Awesome CV template file type. You're going to want to input your metadata at the top. So here where it says input first, you'll change that to your first name, next to name. Next to surname, you'll change that to your last name. And everything, you know, that's pretty obvious, I guess, about yourself. You'll input. This is a good time to switch this back over. So here we are in the instructions. If you scroll back up and open the example CV in a new tab, if you want to kind of see like input first, right? That's your first name, that's your last name. Here's how it'll look, you know, in the resume. So if that helps you kind of input this information here based on how it will look here, hopefully that helps to see that example. So you'll replace this. I'm just going to put my, oops. I'm going to just put my abbreviations. Now I've put my work address, put my work number. I'm going to keep the profile picture as what it is. If you replace this file with your own picture, there shouldn't be anything that you have to do here. If you did not change your picture's file name, then you'll want to make sure to make the exact file name of your profile picture here. For your email address, self-explanatory. You'll provide your email, Twitter, if you have one. Gosh, I don't even know my whole LinkedIn. I think it's like something like that. We'll make it up. You'll leave date because this is just a formatting input for how to format dates within your file. So you'll notice that, of course, within a resume, there are all these dates of like when you worked and when you publish something. So you'll leave this as is. And then you can add a short bio here. I just put something random that just came to my head, but of course you'll provide here a small statement about yourself. Once again, looking at the example here, it will go here so you can have a good idea of how much will fit in that space. And you'll provide your kind of about me statement. Once again, we're going to use the Awesome CV format. I definitely recommend after the workshop trying out different CV files, but just so that we're all consistent with what we are doing and seeing, we're going to stick with the Awesome CV. And once you're at that point, you can obviously always save your, Control S or Command S, or hit the little, for the young people, that's a floppy disk, which is how we used to save things. Hit the little save button in order to save the changes that you just made to the R Markdown file. And at this point now you've updated the metadata that exists within this file. So the next thing you're going to want to do is, back to my instructions. You're going to want to find my ORCID and replace it with yours. This is just helpful to do that from the start. So if you copy my ORCID, I'm going to type it in the chat. Just copy those numbers and you can hit Control F, or if you're on a Mac, Command F, and find, and then in the replace section, put your own. Obviously I'm replacing it with my own, but you'll replace my ORCID with your own. So go ahead and hit either Command F on a Mac or Control F on a Windows and select the find and replace, or input the find and replace values, with the find being what I just pasted in the chat, which is my ORCID, and replace it with your own. And you'll see that it's been replaced in 5 places. That's just helpful so that you don't have to go in and manually do that and accidentally forget a step and wonder, when did you go to the University of Oklahoma? So I'm going to take a second while you update your metadata at the top and replace my ORCID with your own. Actually, funny story about the whole long walks in the park. I was on a walk in the park with my daughter yesterday. We were looking for Texas bluebonnets, which are the state flower of Texas. If you haven't seen them, they're beautiful. And it's a tradition for families, people, kids, dogs to take pictures in the bluebonnets every spring. And we ran into so many snakes. My 3-year-old daughter came home and was telling my husband about how a snake attacked everybody and there were snakes everywhere. So I think I just gave her her first phobia, unfortunately. But if you haven't seen Texas bluebonnets, if you're ever in Texas in the springtime, particularly in April, I recommend you checking this out. Thanks, Amy. And there's a bluebonnet capital actually just south of Dallas-Fort Worth area called Ennis, Texas, E-N-N-I-S, that has a huge bluebonnet, like as many bluebonnets as you want to see. You want to see it by a lake or by a windmill. People go for the Bluebonnet Festival every year, which goes from April 1st to I think like the 16th this year. Okay, hopefully you all have been able to update your information and switch out my ORCID ID with your own. And now we're going to go ahead with kind of the R ORCID part. So we're going to, for the sake of this demonstration, we're only going to import our work history, education, and publications. Now, there's options in here for manually inputting all of these things that you can make use of. You'll just comment out. If you're not familiar with commenting out, you just put the £, and that then it skips that code in R. So you can see here under education, remember that the £1 means in our Markdown, £1 means it's a header. So we can see that education is a header, work experience, languages, skills, and publications are all headers. So what we should expect is that in our Markdown, we're going to see a £, publications, £, skills, and so on in front of our headers. So we see that here with education, which is our first section. Underneath education is when the RS code starts, and within Art Markdown, you indicate that with 3 tick marks, and then you have R within curly brackets. I believe that R Markdown allows for other types of languages if you were to switch, but I actually don't remember. General Markdown does, but depending on where you have it, it may or may not recognize it. You can tell with the colors. For example, in my instructions here, this is, as I mentioned, using GitHub flavored Markdown, and so GitHub allows for various languages, so I'm able to then use the notation to indicate, okay, our code is coming up, and you can see the coloring, which shows that it recognizes that it's in R and what that would look like. So you'll do the same thing within our Markdown, in that you'll have your tick marks, your curly bracket with R in the middle, and then your closing curly bracket. And that is also shown gray. And to finish it, you end with your 3 tick marks. So you can see the chunk of R code that is here in between the actual Markdown language. So just remember, Markdown uses the £, for a heading. R and most languages use the £, for what we call commenting out. It's usually for like leaving yourself a little note or things like that, or skipping code. So we have a chunk of code here. This is how you're going to first interact with your ORCID profile. So if you ever want to see a map of arguments that exists within the R ORCID package, which let me load the R ORCID package. Let's actually just go ahead and load all of our packages. If you recall, we restarted our R session, so you'll need to reload R ORCID again. You'll also want to load Tidyverse. If you don't know about Tidyverse, it's amazing. And it does a lot of stuff. It's great for tidy data, created by Hadley Wickham. So I highly recommend looking into that more. We're going to be using that to structure our data into our resume. We'll obviously be using the VITAE package to create our, in this case, it's not really a CV, it's more of a resume. And we'll be using dplyr to also clean up our data. So you'll want to load those 4 packages. As Amy mentioned, they're all listed stepwise in step 17. If you've never used Tidyverse or some of these other packages, don't forget to first install .packages with the name of the package in quotation marks before you load the libraries. I make use of Tidyverse and dplyr quite often, so I already have them installed on my machine, and obviously I created this workshop, so I obviously have R ORCID and VITAE installed as well. So you'll want to install packages first if you need to do that before loading all 4 of these libraries. I like to do that first. I actually forgot to mention at the beginning that this template was a made for self template created by a researcher named Tamara Sternlib, and she sent it to me, and I was able to make modifications that hopefully will allow all of us or anyone to make use of this template. And she has the libraries located kind of within. But what I typically like to do is this is just for us to test it out and make sure all of our code works. Obviously, when it runs, it's going to need to load those libraries. But as we're just testing the code, instead of remembering, oh, I forgot to load this library, oh, I forgot to load that one, just go ahead and load all four so that you're ready to just run anything at any time. Hopefully at this point you've replaced my ORCID with your own, and it's basically the R ORCID call to pull your education. This bind underscore rows, I'm trying to remember if that's a dplar command. I think that's a dplar command. It might be tidyverse, I can't remember. To basically structure that data. And then the second element is the kind of using piping to basically fill in information from ORCID into a structured format that can be used in your CV. So you'll want to, once you've loaded those four libraries, you're going to want to run these lines if you have your education updated in your ORCID profile. So, show my ORCID profile. You can see that I have my education input within my ORCID profile. So you can see my three university degrees that I have. If you don't have anything here, we'll talk about that next, about how to just input it directly into your resume. However, if you do have it here, please go ahead and make use of the code that's provided just to make sure that you are able to just go ahead and sync there. Obviously, education doesn't update that often. You know, you don't just get degrees every 3 weeks. So it's not that difficult to input that manually if that's how you choose to input your resume. But if you already have this information here, then I recommend using ORCID API to automatically import that information into your resume, VITAE, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to run these. Once again, only do this if you have ORCID education completed in your ORCID profile. And then you should be able to see that your education is now available. You can even click on it and see the information that was obtained from ORCID about me, you know, your start dates, your end dates if you have them, the city, state, country, and even the identifier for that institution. You can see that information in the my_ed variable. If you do not have your education in your ORCID profile, you can basically, these lines are all commented out. So if you switch to commenting all these lines out, oops. Sorry, I'm being distracted. I'm seeing errors in the chat. So if you want to comment these lines out, oops. You can comment these lines out so that then you're able to run these lines and replace them with your information. So if you recall, these first two are for using ORCID API, but if you don't have your education, you can just replace your information in here according to your degree, the year or range of years, the institution, and the location. So you can manually input this if you don't, if you don't ever plan on adding this information to your ORCID profile, then you can go ahead and just add it to your resume manually. If you do have it in your ORCID profile, of course, then you can keep them commented out so that they are skipped whenever whenever this full thing is run. Okay, so I'm going to pause while people work on that. And we're basically just going to repeat this 3 times. So you guys have gotten pretty much the meat of the workshop. We'll just repeat this again for work experience and then for publications. So let me pause for a moment and see, give you all a chance to work on that, and then I'll try to address Rohit's question.
So, Beast, I think we have a couple people going into the breakout room for
Okay.
this help. There was, I think you saw Rohit's question, and we were wondering if it's the way that it's been formatted in ORCID to see. So they may be looking at formatting of the ORCID.
I clicked on Rohit's profile and it looks like it's filled out. So I don't think it's the ORCID profile.
Okay.
I'm comparing it to my own and it looks the same. I also switched the call to bind underscore rows because it allows for uneven profiles. So I had to specifically use that call because, you know, like say they enter an institution name but not a job title, or they enter a starting year but not an ending, and they don't have a year for another thing. Some of the other commands that were in here were only good for when your data were all perfect and tidy in a row and everything was filled out exactly the same. So it should allow for some variability.
Okay. But you said you unbound, so in line 30, you changed the code, or did you just comment it? Is that what you meant?
I didn't change the code at all. The only thing I've shown is how to comment out the code if you wanted to manually input your own education here. But if you, and in Rohit's case, they have the data, you know, to use ORCID. So this should remain commented out, or they can even delete that if they don't want to use it. And they should be able to use this, basically this assignment to my ed, and then this update to the assignment. And they should end up with a list of, I'm sorry, this is education. So a list of their education.
Okay. So Rohit, I see you are back in the main room. Does this address your questions? And you can unmute if you. At least I think people can unmute. Okay, I see a yes in the chat. I'm going to assume that's for my question. Okay, yes, it worked. Okay. So,
Excellent.
and I think Mark is working with someone. I don't know what their issue is, but we can, I guess, proceed on if need be.
We can also wait because we're just doing that 3 times, basically. You know, we just pulled in the education. We are going to next pull in work experience and then publication. So if people are able to get it to work this first time, then the rest of it should be a lot smoother, because then it's just repeating the same thing with a new field from ORCID. So maybe I'll give it like 5 more minutes, and then we'll use the last 10 minutes or so for the last 2 calls and knitting, and then if there are any questions, there'll be time at the end, hopefully.
Okay, I'm going to pop over to the breakout session and check on what's going on there.
All right. If you're here and you're updated, you can actually go ahead and move on. As I mentioned, you just do this 3 times. So the next one is for work experience. You can see that header here. And in the R code, you'll run this to get work experience. There is a comment. So if your employment doesn't have an end date, like say your most recent employment is 2010 to present, then you'll want to replace where it says employment dash summary dot end date dot year dot value with employment dash summary dot end slash. You'll replace this one with this one. I won't read it off because that's confusing. But you'll take this here and change it to the new variable so that it recognizes that there's no end date for that most recent employment. And then you'll go ahead and run. If you're like Rohit and you need to run one at a time, you'll just run this one first. If you don't have an end date to your employment, you'll switch this out and then run this one. Once again, if you already have, or if you don't have your work experience in your ORCID profile, you'll want to use the Tibble library, which is basically like a type of data frame. And if you're not familiar with that, it's like a data structure format. So you'll want to load that library if you didn't load it earlier, and then just manually input your job title, years of employment, and so on in these sections, and just uncomment out that code.
Okay, everyone's back from the breakout room, so we're ready to move on.
Excellent. All right, so one thing I mentioned to those who were in the breakout room was that basically we're doing it 3 times. So we did it with my education. We'll do it again with your experience and your publications. So if you were able to make that first section of our code work, which were lines 27 through 48, then you should go ahead and move on, and hopefully it'll be a continuously easier process, because once again, we're just doing the same thing 3 times. This time we're now connecting to ORCID employments in order to fill out the work experience section. Now I do have, Rohit had a situation where it was useful for him to run the first call first, and then run the second one. So you may, if you get an error, you may want to try that. Also note that for the second one, if you don't have an end date to your most recent employment, so if it has, such and such to the present, you'll want to replace this end date value with this text here. So you'll want to copy this text and replace it here, and then you'll want to run this. So that is for those who are like working somewhere from 2015 to present, and so they don't have an end date for that most recent employment line. Make that replacement before you run it. Otherwise, you can go ahead and run this and run that just to make sure that they work. So I'm gonna run. And so you'll see here now that they've been able to load that data. Hopefully that was rather easy based on, just doing it a second time. We're going to move on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this is a little bit more of the Markdown part of our Markdown, a little bit less R. As we get to skills and languages, you'll notice that in ORCID we don't have that information of what languages you know and what skills you'd like to list. So if you would like to list languages and skills, you can do that using this formatting here. You'll just input the languages that you need. If you need to add more, you can just add a line with the Enter key. If you need fewer, you can take away a line with just deleting as you normally would. To add a line, remember to make sure you use that R Markdown syntax. So the asterisks followed by a space means a bullet point. So that's going to be a bullet. Now, two asterisks together is how you signify bold. And this is where spacing is important. So as I just mentioned, it's the asterisk and the space that means a bullet point. Otherwise, if you don't put a space and you just typed here, it's going to think you want it in italics. So you want to make sure that you add that space to signify a bullet, and then you don't add a space when you're talking about either bold or italics, and you start and end where the bolding starts and ends. So it's saying bullet and then start bold. All of the text after this is in bold, and now complete my bold text. And then you can add more information at the end. And then drag that over so you can see. So the star with a space will be reflecting a bullet, and then having the two stars around the language will make it bold. You'll see that's also true for your skills as well. So as you replace the skills that are here, you would once again, two stars on both sides of the text mean it's going to be in bold, and then a star with a space after it means that it's going to be a bullet point. So you can see that you can input just regular text, and then you can input bullets underneath. You can just keep it all regular text and delete out all of these bullets. It also allows for a table. Amy pasted the cheat sheet in there, which I think shows how to do a table, which is I find really tedious. But if you like to do a table, you can do that as well. But for now, for our workshop, we're just going to input everything as a bulleted list. So skills, languages are all input as bulleted lists in order to look like this. And then our very last step will be importing our publications data. So you can see now we have a # with a space to represent our next heading.
So I see Rohit has a question about affiliation-group in ORCID. And I'm trying to see kind of where that, because I would assume it's University of Cincinnati, but where that shows up.
Is that here?
Yeah, it's in your code there.
I'm assuming that's where he's getting the question. I'll just assume that's where you're getting the question. So in R, a lot of this, as you know, symbolizes, oh my gosh, the word is escaping me. Not subsections. Subsetting. So you can subset a data set. So data that contains multiple pieces of information, you can subset what information you want from there. I definitely recommend looking more into the R ORCID document provided by Clark that I've loaded into the folder, which goes into more detail about kind of how to subset a lot of these variables or calls, so that then you can see what these kind of stand for. Can I run? Yeah. So as I mentioned with the subsetting, when I ran our ORCID, or I'm sorry, ORCID employments with my ORCID number, you can see that within it, it's basically like a list. So you can see within the list is affiliation group, and within affiliation group are things like summaries, which contain really the data that you need. So under affiliation group, you don't have summaries. It came up for me. I'm seeing summaries here under affiliation group for this is for your profile Revit, and you can see your work experience here. Maybe check let me see what you typed in the chat. Oh, it says ORCID Educations. It should say employments because we're on work experience. So in what you typed in the chat for me, you typed in ORCID_educations, and it should be employments here because we're under work experience. I'm going to go ahead and finish up so that we can conclude. And then Rohit, if you have other questions, we can work through any problems that you might have at the end. Let's see. So your education should have totally different data here. So the data that's being pulled from your education. Oh, okay, let me see. I might have to have you go into a breakout group just so that I can conclude this workshop. So we're going to go ahead and conclude. Mark, if you're able to help check his educations. And I'm going to do the final part of this workshop, which is publications. So everybody should be here under the heading Publications, and we're going to work, within our last chunk of code, which runs from lines 95 to 112. If you haven't loaded these two libraries yet, you can go ahead and load them. Otherwise, they're already loaded in your system. And you're going to go ahead and run, make sure, this has your ORCID, and then you'll run these lines. It's all one set of code that you'll want to run. And then for me, it shows like a little preview of my Tibble. And I can see the names of the journals, years, publication years, and so on after I run that. It may take a second, but if you get that greater than arrow, that should mean that your code ran successfully. Okay, once everything runs smoothly and you made it to the very end, then you've basically checked and updated everything here. I'm going to just save, and you'll know that it should run properly and output your PDF. I'm going to go ahead and knit because for my computer it takes a little while for it to be able to do that. So once you've completed everything, you can go forward with hitting the knit button to create your PDF resume, and you'll see that it begins to work through that process. And it looks like I made a mistake. My Twitter isn't supposed to have the @ symbol. All right, and from there I was able to output a PDF. Yours might not open. You may have to go into your folder. You may have to go into your folder and find the orcid-cv.pdf and see the PDF that you just created. And that's pretty much it. That's the end of the workshop, and you should be able to then knit at any moment. You have new publications or any updates to your resume, and it should add those automatically onto your resume and create a new PDF.
Thank you, Peace. I mean, like I said, there were a lot of moving parts you brought together, and I just really love how you can use the ORCID to bring in the, the content there. All of us in research academia, publishing. It's very important, and the ORCID really helps us maintain that, and to bring it into being able to create a resume from that is really, really useful. So I really appreciate the hard work that was put into this workshop and the steps that you led us through. Does anybody have any questions about what happened here in the last few minutes that we have? Seeing any? I know that Mark and I think Rohit is still over in the breakout room. So I'm going to leave the meeting open. But Peace, do you have anything that you want to close us out with?
No, that's it. I was just pointing out on screen that you'll notice I made the mistake of using the @ symbol before my Twitter. You don't use the @ symbol before your Twitter. You just put in the just your Twitter account profile name. And as you'll see, if you highlight your mouse over the PDF, it does provide a link to the actual Twitter account. Same for LinkedIn. I recall stating, just put in, and I don't even know if that's my URL, but put in your actual friendly URL, just the ending part, and it will be appended to the full link if someone were to click on it. And then the email also works as well. So I just wanted to point that out. And I want to thank everybody for coming. And I appreciate your working all the way through this, even with errors.
Like I said, we have recorded the session today. It will be available through the same link that all the workshop material is. I'll get it up as soon as I can. And we'll also put in closed captioning for those that need it. It'll be available. It looks like Mark and Rohit are trying to see if they can still figure it out, but are having some issues.
Okay.
So we'll just, I guess we'll leave them over there, but given that it's almost 12 o'clock and I know that people have things to go to, so if you want to sign out, I'll leave the meeting open, but we really appreciate you attending this series and look for more sessions coming up in the Data and Computational Science series. And again, Peace, I can't thank you enough for putting this workshop together, for pulling all these pieces together. Like I said, a lot of moving parts, and it was really impressive. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming.